I'm here today with Chaplain Richard, and I thought it was really interesting. I'd heard what they're doing for the police behind the scenes that I was completely unaware of when I got an email from his coworker, and so I was very happy to have him on today. So thank you, Chaplain Richard, for being here today. I'd love for you to give a little intro about yourself and intro so people can see what you're about.
All right. Well, it's good to be with you and get a chance to talk about something that's very near and dear to my heart. Um, I've been a ordained pastor for 28 years and 20 years actually in the same location in Northeast Indiana, which is really kind of unique in that normally we don't stay in one spot that long and things to that effect. And half of that time, I've been a law enforcement chaplain with our local police department as well. And then 5 of those 10 years, I've been the lead chaplain with the police department. And that's where I speak to you as of right now, is the lead chaplain of our local police department, and also the public relations director for the International Conference of Police Chaplains, which I've been a member of for over 10 years. And the International Conference of Police Chaplains is 2,300 chaplains literally all over the world in 9 different countries. And it's a great organization from the standpoint of it's for continuing education and training, but also for networking with other law enforcement officers and officers in general who are liaison officers, as we call them, which is a member of the police department, but they also relate to us as clergy, as chaplains that are in that department there. And it's just really a great opportunity to talk about something that's very near, as I said earlier, dear to my heart, from the standpoint that our local law enforcement officers, both in the community and in the county and in the state and in the nation, are currently really needing our thoughts and prayers in a positive way, from the standpoint that right now they're facing some really troubling times in their life. And almost all of us can feel it from the standpoint with the coronavirus and even racial relations that are across our country there as well.
Yeah, even just perception of the police in general outside of racial relations. I mean, a lot of the BLM protesters are white. Majority of them, the overwhelming majority. I think it's, sadly just a rhetoric against the police beyond any kind of
Yep.
race issues. Have you noticed in the past year or so a dramatic shift in the morale of law enforcement who are around you and
I wouldn't say that it's been in the last year, but I would say obviously in the last month,
oh yeah.
it's really gotten heated in that direction, because a number of our officers are coming to me and saying, that people are saying to them they need to either decide with either their racial background, if they happen to be African American or Asian, and officer, being a police officer as well, and trying to decide which side that they're going to be a part of. And I unfortunately think that that's something that's really troubling a number of officers, because they feel that they should be able to be in both those
I mean,
and not have to make a decision as to which one is pitted against the other one there.
well, I would imagine it's almost, once you create that kind of narrative, it's impossible to do your job properly. Once you're in a position where you feel like society is telling you that you're betraying your race. I mean, I've seen it with my wife. She's Dominican and Haitian. Whenever she has an opinion that's not mainstream to the left, they really come after her and tell her she's betraying her race. I can only imagine what that is as a law enforcement officer. I want to ask a question just because I've only recently kind of started finding faith and started getting into religion, and I have a whole backwards kind of approach to this. I'm the opposite of most people. Most people start off religious and then maybe lose it and then find it. I didn't have that much growing up, and so in terms of what you do for police, I don't fully know about it. I don't fully understand it. If you want to just let me know, that would be awesome.
Okay. Well, the one thing I can tell you, I'll just speak starting with the local department that I have here in Northeast Indiana. Okay. There are 487 officers in our department, with another 100 that are support for those officers there. And obviously they have family members and things to that effect. As a police chaplain, There are currently 5 of us that are a part of our core right now that are able to go out and to be with those officers and to be with them in crisis situations in our community there with that. And then beyond that, I actually have 3 more that are support chaplains, or not actually chaplains, but support pastors or religious leaders in the community that can also help us. And so when you ask what is a law enforcement chaplain, well, first of all, we're interfaith, meaning that we're not one particular breed of denomination or one particular way of looking at our relationship with God. And we cross all interfaith relations there with that, from Muslim to Christianity to Judaism to even atheism and things. We are just a presence there in the midst of those crises there with that. Now, in our department, as part of that, the standard operating procedure for us is that our first line or priority is to our officers, administration, and staff and their families. And what that means is that when I go on the scene of a homicide or a car accident or anything that's out there, when I'm called out as a chaplain, my first response is to check in with those officers and see how they're doing and make sure that they're doing okay. Then second is the community. While I am an ordained pastor in the community, I'm obviously tied into that community there with that. And so consequently, then when I get there, then I'm helping that family or those victims around that scene, and trying to calm them, but also to give them some assurance that they're not alone in this journey where they're at there with that. And as a law enforcement chaplain, the thing that oftentimes is thought of as, is there any proselytizing? Am I trying to get new members or things to that effect? And I will tell you point blank that that is not what I'm there for. I'm really there to just be a presence of God in the midst of that crisis that's going on. And when we talk about it from the standpoint of in the community, oftentimes they didn't even know that there were chaplains in our department because we're kind of one of those silent minorities along the way there with that. Because remember, I said there's 487 officers, but there's only 5 chaplains there. So the ratio is very small, relatively speaking. And consequently, it's one of those deals of where we really have a difficulty in trying to get across really who we are and what we are, even though we're there and we've been around in our department for over 30 years now. And so that's kind of a neat opportunity there. And part of that is because we do change over quite a bit. While I have been a part of the Fort Wayne, which is where I'm at, police department, and I've been there for 10 years, my immediate predecessor was only there as the lead chaplain for 4 years, and his immediate predecessor was there for 5 years. Well, when you turn over people like that fast, it's really kind of difficult to get any long-term kind of relationship that builds in there. Yeah. And the other part of it with it is that there's a test that also goes along with this with regards to keeping us so that we are interfaith, so that we're not promoting one breed or type of faith over another one. Meaning that when we go out onto the scene, the first one is that I don't ask a person, do you believe in Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior? And if they say no, then go, well, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you anymore. No, that's not the case. Or do you believe in Allah? No, and so no, I don't want to talk to you anymore. But yet the presence is that I will ask, especially in a death scene, like if I'm doing a death notification, yeah. I will ask that person, do you have a faith community that I can call to give you some support? Because the one thing about being around as long as I have in this community, on my phone, I have on speed dial literally a couple of hundred religious leaders in my phone that I can call almost from every congregation in our community there with that. And that way then we can connect them and to really give them some support along the way in a very tragic um, crisis scene. Because the reality, when they're calling me as a chaplain out to those scenes, that automatically is a crisis scene for the person or victim that's there, as well as those law enforcement officers that are there too, because they're experiencing that in a very personal way. And matter of fact, the interesting thing is most uh, officers, law enforcement community, have code names for or call signs for everybody, much like when you see on the military on movies and TV shows and things to that effect. Well, my call sign, which was not, I did not come up with it. Actually, several members of the law enforcement community of my department actually came up with it, which is I'm the calmer.
Right?
Because when I come onto the scene, I calm the situation of where things are at. It and it can be fairly riled up and pretty traumatic at the time,
Yeah.
but after a period of time and just calmly talking about where things are at, the anxiety level starts to drop, and that's really helpful because when you're in a crisis mode, just like like if you've been in an accident, a car accident, the first thing that you do is you start jerking around because you're trying to get out of the scene of where you're at, right?
Yeah.
In life, we also do that same thing. And so, are you thinking rationally? Are you thinking logically of what's going on? No, you're trying to get out of there as quickly as you can.
Yeah.
Well, when you're in a crisis scene, that's really what's also happening too. And even with law enforcement, which are trained in how to deal with crisis scenes and to really get through some struggling times with those scenes of where they're at, they're also trained to stay there with that, because our normal response when we have a crisis is called flight or fight.
Yeah.
And most of us would rather fly out of there than to stay in and fight with what's going on. And I don't really like to use that flight or fight kind of scenario, but it does kind of bring a point, which is that most of us want to get out of crisis scenes. We don't want to go into crisis
Yeah.
scenes. And as law enforcement officers, the first thing that you're taught in the academy is that when you have a crisis scene, you go into that crisis scene. You don't come out of it. You
Mhm.
fix the scene of what's going on and try to actually make it a better place than where it was before.
Well, I mean, that's why so many police officers ran into buildings on 9/11 instead of when everyone else was running away. I mean, that's how they're hardwired. A lot of the ones I'm interviewing, I notice there's a lot of PTSD with in law enforcement, and I think this is very valuable because as great as having more psychological systems in place to help people and having these kind of being able to talk and all that stuff, as that slowly comes out and that slowly increases in the police department, I think this aspect of it should increase as well. Because if you are someone who has faith, that's going to be the most important thing. That's going to be what finds you peace in that moment.
And that
um,
gives you strength to keep going too.
it gives you the strength to keep going, and like you said, it de-escalates a situation. It gives you a place of community, and police officers and people who've been through a crisis need that in that moment. Otherwise they
Right.
can be lost after that if they don't have the right help at the right time. So I think that's so valuable that you're there to be a presence of what people need versus just kind of leaving them there and then because it's easy to lose God in those situations. You see something so tragic and so terrible, and that's when you need to kind of be reinforced in your beliefs so much more. You said there's a high turnover rate. I was just curious why for what you do.
Well, that's because most clergy will stay between 3 and 5 years in a call in a congregation, and then they will move on to the next one. And that's what happens with chaplains too, is that they will be 3 to 5 years and then move on to a new community there with that. If I can kind of piggyback was one of the things that you were talking about earlier there, and I'll give you just a personal example of what happened this morning. And so if all of a sudden I start kind of looking like I'm a little bit on the tired side, that's only because I was called out last night at about 9:30, and then got home at about 1:45 this morning in the AM. And I don't normally stay up quite that late. But there was a homicide scene that took place. And When I arrived on the scene, some of the family members were on the scene of that very location there where their loved one had been killed. And the mother of the victim that was shot wanted to go over and to touch her son and to pray with them. And I said, unfortunately, right now you aren't able to do that. I said, because right now he is our biggest key with regards to collecting data as well as other bits of information with regards to who indeed was the perpetrator of this crime that was there. He's our biggest key with getting that kind of information. And if you go over and just a hair falls onto that body, then it contaminates where that's at. And I said, so right now I really need you to just stay here with me, or you can go home. I will promise you, if you go home, I will stay here with your son until he is taken to the morgue, where he will then have an autopsy sometime tomorrow or later on in the morning. After about 45 minutes to an hour of talking with this lady, she then decided that she would go home. Well, after being there for an hour longer, and they were gathering all the crime scene evidence and things to that effect, they had placed the young man's body into a body bag, and we were waiting for the body to be taken to the morgue. Well, it started to rain. Now, granted, the victim here was actually in a porch because that was where he was shot. So he was in a covered area, but it started to rain, and then it started to get thundering and lightning too. And several of the officers were like, chaplain, hey, it's pouring down rain. You don't have any rain gear, because my car was like 4.5 blocks away, and I was not leaving until that young man's body was taken to the morgue. And so here it is, pouring down rain. I'm now getting soaked out in the middle of this scene. Okay. Well, the thing about it is that the officers said to me, chaplain, hey, you've done your job. Why don't you just go ahead and head home and get dry? And I said, no, I made a promise to this young man's mom that I would stay here until his body left the scene. 2.5 hours later, they finally came and claimed the body there to take him downtown. Needless to say, I was kind of a wet law enforcement clergy person there with that. And the chaplains but the other thing about it is it proved to those officers as well as into the community that when I said I was going to do that, that's that integrity part that's also a very vital part that's there. I said I was going to do that, and even though it was raining and it was coming down with some pretty good sized volume of moisture there, I stayed on that scene. Today, this morning, later on in the morning, I was actually called back to the police station because I was in the crime scene area there. They go, why were you there? And I said, because I had promised his mother that I would be there, and things to that effect. And the thing about it is that it also was showing the importance of when you say you're going to do something, you follow through with that.
Yeah. Well, that's extremely important. I mean, and also just knowing that someone is there with a loved one who's passed, it helps also, because it's another set of eyes on him. And if
Mhm.
and a lot of people don't know what's happening, what the process is when a body gets taken away. And so there's insecurity there. And I think
Right.
having a third party that is a person of faith, guaranteed to be a person of faith, to just oversee it's powerful. It helps you kind of relax and know that they're going to be taken care of properly. So I think it's good that, you're present in those situations.
Right. And it is a crisis scene there with that. I mean, nobody wants their loved one to be killed or to be violently taken from this earth or anything to that effect. And it's the same thing with regards to auto accidents and other things that are crisis scenes. And that was probably the hardest thing for me as a clergy, as well as even a law enforcement chaplain, was that I used to think that I went from one crisis mode to the next, to the next, to the next. And one of the things that I learned is that as a law enforcement chaplain, and I think it makes me as a better pastor as well, is that um, those are no longer my crises, but those are another person's that I get to walk with them in that process there with that. And that frees me too, because it's not all on my shoulders there with that. And that's a healthier way of looking at it from that standpoint. But I get to be a part of where those people are at and to impact them where they're at there too. And I don't take that as a light subject to go on to. It's a very important role. That's not just something that's just, well, I didn't have anything better to do today, so this is what I'm going to do. I get to be there with them. And um, and I get to actually help them in the midst of where that's at. And you're correct in that a lot of what I do as a law enforcement chaplain is to help people to understand the protocol of what our department does with regards to like an autopsy. Most people, they see things on television shows. My big thing is that when people sit there and go, okay, so why can't they do a DNA analysis of what's going on? It doesn't take 20 minutes. It takes more like 3 to 4 months to get that DNA information back, because it's not just a 20-minute segment of a
Yeah.
hour-long TV program there with that. And the other part of it is that when they're collecting evidence in the scene, every single thing that they do, they have to actually label where it is, what they got, and what time it was, and the date that it is too. Because if it's longer and it's been determined that that was there for a lot longer period of time than where that immediate situation is, then that crime scene evidence has been compromised there with that too.
Do you mind me asking? So you went from kind of not seeing this terrible stuff, I'd imagine, to being
Mhm.
exposed to it all the time. Did it strengthen your faith, or did it have an impact on you? How did I mean? What was the first time you kind of went on the job and saw this kind of stuff? Were you blown away, like, oh my god, I don't know how I'm going to do this? Did that?
Um, that did enter my mind for quite a while. And the thing about that was rather interesting is two of my neighbors in my home area here um, are police officers. And I spent a lot of time doing, we caught a little joke with it, kind of like Tim the Toolman Taylor with Wilson, we called it fence time. And they would call me up and they would just go, hey, Richard, I need some FaceTime here with this. Can you come and talk with me about this? And so I would go and I would talk with them at the fence line about all kinds of things that were going on. And then they go, hey, you need to really do this with our department. You would be really good at this. And I'm like, yeah, no, I need another job, like I need a hole in the head is what I really need there with that. And after about 6 to 8 months of constantly sitting there saying to me, hey, you really should go do this, they kind of talked me into it, and I did. And my joke is that I was sworn in as a law enforcement chaplain, and then put on a plane and flown to Spokane, Washington, to attend an international conference of police chaplains training, where I received the 12 basic classes of what a law enforcement chaplain was to do. And initially I was like, I'm doing what? Because it is a major job and things to that effect. But you're not doing it alone is the other part with it. You have law enforcement officers and you have fellow chaplains along the way there too to help you in that process there. And the first time that you're going out and you start seeing the crisis that are in people's lives, the thing that's probably the biggest impact in that whole process is the following, which is it's no longer just a number or a statistic. It's a real person. And it's a real person that had people who loved and cared for. And the thing that I think that we get in our world today with all the media blitzes and things that are going on is that it's just like, well, it's somebody else. Well, the
Mhm.
reality of it is that it's not just somebody else, it's somebody that you know. And then what happens is that you start realizing just how small that community really is. The community that I'm in is over 500,000 people. Okay. And January, there was a young man who was having some issues, and lo and behold, his parents came onto the scene of where we were at. Little did I realize that the person that his parents, I had actually just performed their wedding a year before that very moment. That's how close and how small this world can really truly be. And when I was there, they were just like, well, Pastor, how are you? And what are you doing? I'm like, well, actually, right now I'm chaplain Richard here with this, not Pastor Richard. And then they started asking me questions about everything because they were trying to figure out what was going on. Well, I had already established a trust factor with them because of the relationship that I already had with them.
Hmm.
And that's really helpful in a lot of situations like this because, um, most officers, and when I say most, I'm saying like 85% or higher, um, they're really wanting to do the very best. I'd probably say closer to 90% of all officers are constantly trying to better themselves to do their job continuously there with that. There's another 5 to 10% that are doing their job, and they're really struggling with it because of all the other factors that are going on with them. And those mitigating factors are really difficult because it's not just the media, it's not just public opinion, it's also their family members too that are now placed in danger because of some of the things that people are doing.
Hmm.
um,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that's
yeah.
probably the hardest part with regards to, because it's a lot more mental game than just academic filling out the forms that are along the way there.
We forget a lot of the time that police are human. That's one of the questions, or the last question I actually wanted to ask you, which I think is important, is do you see when you're in these crisis situations how much it affects police officers? I mean, we kind of see them as stone cold. You know, when you imagine a police officer showing up to a scene where there's a dead body, that they just do their job. But I've been talking to a lot of police officers. It's not like that. It stays with them,
No.
especially when it's a child or when they have to save somebody, and they like that's each situation stays with them for life. So I'm wondering what you've seen and how that's impacted police officers.
It has
Um,
impacted them greatly. As a matter of fact, in the latest DSM-7, which is a mental health description book that's put out with regards to clinical psychologists in determining mental states of diagnosis of things. That's what it's called. It's a diagnosis of mental health, and it's the 7th volume that's out there. That's the reason why it's called DM7.
yep.
There is a diagnosis. Most of us have ever always heard of things, especially from the military standpoint, is post-traumatic stress syndrome there, or PSTD. There is now a new clarification for law enforcement officers that's called cumulative post-traumatic stress. And what that is that a law enforcement officer will actually experience most or more post-traumatic stress than our military, who are currently actively and being deployed all around the world, because they will see it continuously for 20, 30 years
Yep.
every day. And you don't forget those scenes when no matter how hard we try, you cannot regress them enough to never remember what they are. And oftentimes what will happen with our law enforcement officers is that they will see things that will remind them of personal things, meaning like a child that was killed will remind them of their own children, or a grandson, granddaughter, or a niece or a nephew, or a family friend. Or if it's an adult, they'll remind them of a good friend or a family member in things. And the image that they have will then be projected on that particular person there too. And
Yep.
those dramatically affect who they are, because they're not robots. They can't turn on and off their emotions. They have to actually, and we want them to be right there too. But we're also trained to control those emotions too, because when you're in a crisis mode, you don't want somebody going ballistic in trying to solve the problem there, because that'll only escalate the issue. That will not help the situation there.
Yep.
And the other part of it with it is, and this is the thing that probably most people, including myself until I became a law enforcement chaplain, didn't realize with regards to our law enforcement, which is that most law enforcement today are in single officer vehicles, meaning that there is only one person in that vehicle as they're going through their shift.
I didn't know that either. Yeah.
And so consequently, because of that, so let's go say that you're called into a scene where two people were killed in a car accident. You finish up the report after everything is all done. You get everybody cleared away. The vehicles are all taken away. All the pieces along the road are all taken care of and things to that effect. And the persons involved in the accident are either taken to the morgue or they're taken to the hospital or they've went home. Okay? That's a pretty traumatic event. Would you agree with that?
Yep.
Okay. So now they get back, they finish their report, hit the button to send it off their computer and things to that effect. On average, within 7 minutes, they're called to another scene to have to do the exact same thing again. They finish that scene within 3 to 5 minutes after hitting that one on an average. They're now sent to another scene. And unfortunately, they don't really get a chance to really what we call debrief from that with another person. They may actually, if they're lucky, be able to maybe meet up with another officer on that next scene there, and they can maybe talk about it again. But the chances of them actually being able to do that sometimes is not very often. I mean, it's less than 20% of the time that they can do that. So in an 8-hour shift on average, most of our police officers are attending to at least 15 to 20 of those crisis scenes every shift. Well, you do that for 4 days in a row, and your emotional status is going to be what?
Yeah.
You're going to be pretty whipped out, right?
You're going to be messed up.
Yeah. And so then we wonder why they're kind of cold, why they don't really want to talk about much of what's going on there with that, is because they need to be in control of what that, because that's what they're trained to do.
Mm-hmm.
And we want them to be in control there with that. Because on the average, I mean, let's say a person is yelling and screaming at you. What's your normal response to do that with
Just
that
someone
person?
yelling and screaming at me? Well, I
Yeah,
confrontational back.
that's right. But do you want your officer to do that?
No, you obviously don't.
No. Yeah, that's correct. That's the correct answer. You did well there. That was the good thing. That was what you were supposed to do. But see, we also are trained not to do that. And even as a law enforcement chaplain, when someone's yelling at me, even in those scenes there with that, I'm trained not to respond back to them with anger and venom back with that as well, because that really doesn't help the scene anymore. That actually escalates it any higher and makes things worse.
Absolutely.
My favorite story that I have with this right now is one where I was called to the scene of a young man whose life was taken. He was shot out in front of his business, and his mother appeared on the scene. His mother had just been released 45 minutes to her son being shot and killed in front of his business from the hospital following a heart attack. I'm actually talking with her in the median in front of the business next to the street, okay? And all of a sudden, his brothers come running at her and me, and they're literally plowing down street signs as they're doing that. They're just bending them down. And there's like 5 of them coming right at me. And all of a sudden, I'm hearing from behind me 4 or 5 officers coming screaming up right behind me because they're trying to protect their chaplain here with that. And I said to the gentleman, guys, I need you to calm down right now. Well, that's my brother. And I said, I understand that. But I'm here to tell you, destroying city property is not going to help your cause right now. And furthermore, the gentlemen behind me are not going to be really happy with you if you continue to do that. And I need you to really to calm down. I said, you're not helping your mom and you're not helping the scene there with that. Eventually, they started to calm down just a little bit. And pretty soon, Mama was sitting there saying to them, boys, I need you to sit down right now and just calm down. They're working on the scene as best as they possibly can. And she was being their mother with where that was at. But the thing about it, I heard from behind me, are you okay, chaplain? I'm like, yeah, because they're very protective of us too, because there's not very many of us, and they want to make sure that we're safe there as well. But I know that they always have my back with that too.
Well, that's very important. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I story to know that they're right there to protect you in a situation where it's going to escalate.
Yeah, and it could have gone the other way. I mean, it could have gotten really bad, really fast.
Yeah,
Because people's emotion, when we're in crisis mode like that, we can't always control our senses of what's going on.
absolutely. No, that I've seen that firsthand in my life where there's a crisis situation and people are just freaking out.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this has been very enlightening for me because I didn't even, to be totally honest, not to embarrass myself, but I didn't know about police chaplains before this. I didn't realize that
Yeah.
they were a thing still. I thought that was, I knew that they existed at one point. I didn't know that they're still kind of out there.
We're
So
still there.
yeah,
And the cool thing is that it has to pass a couple of tests too along the way, area. And I think that that's probably the thing that I really want to kind of close with, to be blunt, is because we don't proselytize to get new members and congregations there with that. We're not trying to lift up one religion as better than another one or anything to that effect. The other part of it is that chaplains in law enforcement are ordained in whatever faith tradition that is, whether you are Christian, Jewish, Muslim, whatever tradition, that's where you're at. And I think that that's really probably the most important thing for folks to realize, is the importance of what that means. What that means is that you're really just a presence of God in the midst of where that crisis is, and you're not trying to promote anything. And even in prayers, I will just call on the name of God. I won't go Jesus Christ or anything to that, because my faith tradition, I do believe in Jesus Christ there with that. But that doesn't mean that I promote that when I'm as a law. Now, if somebody asks, and the other thing is that I will not ask of a person in a crisis mode, do you want me to pray for you? But if they ask me, could you please pray for me, chaplain? Instantly, I can do that with that. But I'm not imposing my faith traditions upon them. Do you see the difference there with that?
yeah, it's completely different. Of course, yeah,
And I think that, and the other part of it is earlier you had asked me if this had helped or hindered my ministry. And the reality of it is that I know this is going to sound really silly because of all the crisis scenes that we're seeing law enforcement be in, and all the scrutiny that's going on because of the media attentions and under the microscopes and what a lot of departments are faced with. I am now calmer as a law enforcement chaplain and as a pastor than what I was before I became that. And part of that is that I've learned, is my wonderful wife will also say, and notice I said wonderful wife there. I want that to be noted in there with that. Is that she is constantly always asking me, so is that in the line in the sand that you're willing to go die on? And there are some times where that's exactly where I am. I am ready to go die on that very line right there, because those are things that I would uphold, and those are where morals and ethics come right in there with that. Other things, it's like, well, no. And she goes, so then don't stand up for it like that then. And so you learn where what's important and what's not. And life is a precious commodity there with that. And our relationship to one another is also of paramount importance there with that. And so I really take it on as a real gift and an honor, to be honest, to just sit and talk with yourself and others of what that importance is. Because I think the more times we get an opportunity to lift up the importance of what life is and life with one another, the better we as a community and a global village will truly be. Because we have to live with one another. If we constantly are battling with one another, we will kill each other and we will blow this planet up.
yeah. I mean, we're starting to see it. Sadly, crime rates are going
Yeah.
up and on.
And the other thing that I think that's also really important, if I can just kind of take one more editorial kind of leeway here for just a moment, is that the thing that in the midst of all this coronavirus and other things that are going on, the the religious community has been where we have gained our most strength from in the past, in the history of our civilization in general. And the problem with being socially isolated and to be socially distanced is probably the thing that's going to be detriment to us as a community. I understand. Please do not understand that I am not promoting the idea of no, we don't need to wear. We do need to wear masks. We do need to be socially distanced, and we need to be protective and proactive with regards to that. I am not saying that. Okay, I want that said up front and understood where I'm at there with that. But what I'm saying is that in the history of our civilization, the place where we have gained the most strength and the most support is within our faith communities, where we can actually bond together and gain that strength that's there.
Yep.
And I think that that's the part that's the hardest during this time period right now, especially for a lot of law enforcement chaplains, is because we are very people oriented, and that's how we're hardwired. And right now, needing to be socially distanced, my chief actually makes fun of me because until this week, I have not been able to actually be near our officers than 6 feet. And I haven't been able to do what we call ride-alongs with our officers, which is going along in their car during their shift and things to that effect. And so my chief actually says that I'm really good at trolling the parking lots of our community because I'm looking for police officers so I can pull in and talk with them with that. But the thing about it is that I think that that's really the important part right now too, because earlier when I said there's single car officers right now, they don't have anybody to really talk to during those 8 hours that they're out there in patrol,
Yeah.
unless they actually stop with another officer and things. But they can't do that for very long because they're needing to go on to the next scene.
No, I agree. Absolutely. It's important. It's important that they have interactions. All right. Well, I mean, I think we covered everything.
Covered a lot of stuff there, didn't we?
No, for me, it was very educational. So
Thank you. Well, I love to talk with you anytime. As you can tell, this is one of my passions and one of the things that's really near and dear to my heart and to the ministry that I have been blessed to be a part of there. And I thank you for that opportunity very much to be able to talk about that.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your time today.
All right. Thanks, Ian. I appreciate it.
Thank you.